internet search on sourdough from scratch. It will tell you how to make your own starter for making sourdough bread. And I recall having read somewhere of an old Alaska hand. I don't remember what I was reading, but this guy going into Alaska when the gold rush was just starting was carrying with him a little crock of starter that had been in his family for generations. It lasts that long. Actually, it doesn't just last that long because it is renewed every time you make a loaf of bread. You pinch off some of it, put it back in your little crock, cover it up, keep it moist. And when you get ready to make your next loaf of bread, you get it out, you mix it in the dough, and go through the same cycle over and over again. That's why a lot of the old prospectors were called sourdoughs. They actually carried along with them the starter for their biscuits that they were going to make when they got where they were going. Okay, well, when you understand that the stuff can last for 10, 20, 30, 40 years and more, then when Paul speaks of old leaven, this is a reference to the practice of sourdough bread. That's what I call old. You've been in your family for 3 or 4 generations. This was the starter that they had to throw out at the beginning of the days of unleavened bread. You know, get your home unleavened, throw out the starter, throw out any baked bread that you have, of course, and get all of that out so that you will have nothing but unleavened bread, as the Israelites did coming out of Egypt. They had no time to fool around with it. They couldn't wait for their bread to rise, couldn't wait to, make the starter mix. They had to go. And I expect they had killed every bit of their starter before they got very far down the road. So the symbolism of unleavened bread for the Jews has to do with haste, being thrust out of Egypt, having no time to wait, and that's why they had to eat unleavened bread. Now, I tell you all this. Oh, by the way, I've heard that bread that's made from starter that's created in different locations doesn't taste the same. Has a different or distinct flavor to it, which I suppose is why San Francisco sourdough bread has that unique flavor that everybody brags so much on. And people will go out there and buy it and carry it home on the airplane because it is a very good form of sourdough bread. I don't know what you would get here in East Texas if you did your own starter. I hope it would not taste like oil wells. Okay, I tell you all this simply to tell you that these are all indications here of the fact that the writing of this letter was in this season, in the days of unleavened bread. He goes on then to say, even Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us. Therefore, let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, neither with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. There's your analogy. He basically calls out leaven and uses it and says there's a leaven of malice and wickedness, but we need the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. I don't think this was generally the explanation of leaven offered by the Jews. I'd be interested to know if it ever has been. My suspicion is it was not, that this is just simply a happenstance on Paul's part. As a writer, he reached out to find an analogy to kind of underline and punch home what he was trying to say to the Corinthian church. Now, what do you think? And here's the important thing. Now we know that's an analogy. What is the underlying meaning that Paul is driving at? It's not that hard when you read the whole chapter. You have a church that was a little bit more than self-exalting. They were puffed up. They were vain. They were self-exalted. There was a lot of antagonism among them. And you don't have too much trouble getting that when you read from chapter 1 on up to this point. And people are in there arguing with one another about who the right leader is. And you know how that works out among people. You know, one man says, well, I'm of Paul, I'm of Apollos, I'm of Peter, I'm of Christ. You know, when you get a little bit of that going on, it doesn't take very long for malice to lift up its ugly head between people taking sides in this situation. So, you've got a lot of antagonism among you. You've got malice there. Wickedness? Oh, yeah. You have one of your number who is sleeping with his father's wife. Now, what are the values that we should be striving toward? Well, sincerity and truth. Now, Paul continues to develop the theme by explaining what is at issue. He says, I wrote to you in an epistle not to company with fornicators, yet not altogether with the fornicators of this world or the covetous or extortioners or idolaters. You have to do that, folks. You have to say, stop the world and let me off, because you can't get away from it in this society. If you're in business, if you're working, if you're whatever you're doing, you're going to be companying with people who do these things. But now I have written to you not to keep company if any man who is called a brother be a fornicator, a covetous person, an idolater, a railer, a drunkard, an extortioner. With such a one, no, not to eat. Now here is a really crucial thing, because obviously this church knew this guy was doing this. And they would sit down at a table and eat with him as though nothing were wrong. They didn't really rebuke him for what he was doing. Nobody said what you're doing is a sin. What you're doing is bringing disrepute on the church. They just went on. They didn't go along with him. They just didn't say anything. And Paul says, I'm telling you, don't even sit down to eat with such a person. And in this particular case, he's basically telling him, get this guy out from your midst. He's giving you a bad name in the community. Now, I'll grant, my congressman is not my brother. However, it's highly suggestive, this is whether I should endorse him or not. And my vote is a form of endorsement. You got politicians up there who the facts all begin to come out on them as to what kind of people they are. Do you remember, some of you may remember back in one of the earlier presidential campaigns before our President to-do, the people would talk in the news, talking heads on television would talk about what they called the character issue, as though it was on par with the economic issue, the economic policy, foreign policy, and and then of course the character issue. And there was a serious question was raised as to whether we should take the character issue into account, because if the guy has good foreign policy, if he's a good administrator, if he's effective, then that's all we need to know about him. Wrong. Dead wrong. The character issue has to come at the very beginning. Now, nobody's perfect, and you don't have to expect politicians to be, that perfect either. But the fact is, power corrupts. And you should always, when you're thinking about voting for this or that politician, consider how he has responded to whatever power he has had. The test of power has to be considered. Okay, Paul says, now what do I have to do to judging those who are without? He means outside the church and outside the faith. Don't you judge those who are within the faith? To them that are without, God judges. Therefore, now we come down to the bottom line of what he's saying. Put away from among yourselves that wicked person. So, all analogies aside, get rid of this rascal. Don't let him come back to church. Don't let him sit in your potlucks. Don't let him be a part of the things that you are doing. Now, you may say quite justifiably that we're all sinners. What are any of us doing here? But the fact is, people like to say there's no degree of sin. Yes, there is. There is a degree of sin, and there is a question of whether or not your sin has become a shame upon the church. In this case, it had. Now, here's an important thing for us to understand. What was the result of this action on Paul's part? What happened as a result of them listening to what he said and putting this guy out of the church and not eating with him? Well, in 2 Corinthians, when he writes the second letter back, beginning in verse 1, he says, I determined with myself that I would not come again to you in heaviness, for if I make you sorry, who is he that makes me glad but the same which is made sorry by me? I wrote the same to you, lest when I come I would have sorrow from them of whom I ought to rejoice. He said, I thought this thing, I heard this, and I felt what I've got to do is I've got to deal with this by letter, because when I go there, I want it to be a positive visit. I want us to get a lot of good things done, and I don't want to have to be facing this situation. That's what he's saying to them. He said, I don't want to have to rejoice, having confidence in you all, that my joy is the joy of you all. For out of much affliction and anguish of heart, I wrote to you with many tears, not that you should be grieved, but that you should know the love I have abundantly for you. I don't think Paul is using hyperbole here. I think when he wrote that first letter in that section, I think he had tears on his face as a result of what he had to write. But if any has caused grief, he has not grieved me, but in part. I don't want to overcharge anybody here. Sufficient to such a man is the punishment which was inflicted by many. One, what they did was punishment. It's very simple. It was afflicted by many. In other words, the whole church, I don't know what they did, but they formally put this guy out of the church. And then I presume they wouldn't eat with him, wouldn't have anything to do with him. He says, it's enough. What we have done is plenty. So that contrariwise now you ought to forgive him and comfort him, lest perhaps such a one should be swallowed up with overmuch sorrow. So I want you to confirm your love toward him, for this is the reason why I wrote, that I might know the proof of you, whether you are obedient in all things. To whom you forgive anything, I forgive it. For if I forgive anything to whom I forgave it for your sakes, I forgave it in the person of Christ, lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. I think it's really one of the more encouraging things in the Bible, where sin is dealt with, and it's dealt with severely, with a reason, for a purpose. And then to come back to a second letter, that's soon afterward, and the guy has already responded to it, and the church is instructed to take him back and display their love for him. So we got results. We got the sin out of his life. We got the sinner back in the church, having gotten his life cleaned up. Okay. Now then, where do we go from here? Well, later in the letter, 2 Corinthians chapter 7, nevertheless, God that comforts those that are cast down comforted us by the coming of Titus. And not by his coming only, but by the encouragement wherewith he was encouraged in you, when he told us your earnest desire, your mourning, your fervent mind toward me, so that I rejoiced the more. Titus came back, he says, boy, that church turned themselves inside out when they got that letter. They had to deal with it. They couldn't let it alone. Though I made you sorry with a letter, I do not repent, although maybe for a while I did. I was sorry. I perceive that the same epistle has made you sorry, but for a season. Now I rejoice, not that you were made sorry, but that you sorrowed to repentance. For you were sorry after a godly manner, that you might receive damage by us in nothing. Godly sorrow works repentance to salvation, not to be repented of. But the sorrow of the world works death. Now, if you mark your Bible, that's a scripture to mark. It's a memory verse to remember. It's something to lay hold on and don't let get away from you. Godly sorrow works repentance to salvation, and not to be repented of. The sorrow of the world works death. Now, I don't think I really need to give you any examples of the sorrow of the world, because you haven't come to this age and this time in life without encountering it more than once. People who seem to be sorry, and yet they keep right on doing the same thing. That is the sorrow of this world. Sort of like they're sorry they got caught. They're sorry it didn't work as well as they did. But the godly sorrow is simply not there. For behold, the selfsame thing. You sorrowed after a godly sort. What carefulness it wrought in you. What clearing of yourselves, yea, what indignation, yea, what fear, what vehement desire, yea, what zeal, what revenge. I mean, these people, when they realized it, they finally faced up to what they were doing. It really caused them to shape up. In all things you have approved yourselves to be clear in this matter. So, though I wrote to you, I didn't really do it for his cause that had done the wrong, or for his cause that had suffered wrong, but that our care for you in the sight of God might appear to you. Therefore we were comforted by your comfort, and exceedingly the more joyed we for the joy of Titus, because his spirit was refreshed by you all. Titus came away from Corinth very refreshed. He went in there, I have no doubt, with a very furrowed brow. But when he came out of there, he was refreshed, encouraged, and uplifted because of what he had seen in that church. Now, I have little doubt that this was a major upheaval in the Corinthian church. Paul says that, essentially. The Corinthian church went through a little metaphorical unleavening. Metaphorical in the sense that it was a man and not bread, but they had to get that out from among them on this occasion. Now, what was the instrumentality of getting this done? I think we all know that even though we strive to get sin out of our lives, we can't do it by ourselves. This is evident in every discussion we ever get into on this. Well, nobody's ever completely free of sin, just like in your home. You think you've got it all. You haven't got it all. You'll stumble onto something. You'll find something. And even if you don't find it, there's something there. You know, we used to talk, we built the house we're living in. Some 26 years ago we moved in. And during the construction of that house, the workmen, probably ate their lunch right there while they were building that house. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised if here or there, under the carpet or in the wall or behind whatever, some crumbs from their lunch stayed. It's not that kind of thing that we have to worry about in terms of sin in our lives. What we need to concern ourselves with are the big stuff, the stuff that we know about and just won't admit, the stuff that we need to deal with, know we need to deal with it. It's not hidden from us at all. Maybe there are some hidden sins. There were in this particular case in this church, and somebody had to call them on it. Okay, following our metaphor just a little bit further, I want you to turn back with me to the 12th chapter of the book of Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 12. Because remember, all this business about leaven as a type of sin is an analogy that's designed to speak to an underlying truth. The truth that we are all sinners, the truth that we all screw up, the truth that we make unintended mistakes, the truth that we sometimes even intend to do, and then later on don't realize what we have done. Okay. He then begins chapter 12 by saying, seeing we are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, and that's following on the heels of chapter 11, which is often called the faith chapter, because of all these examples of people who gave up everything for the faith, people who faced death for the faith, people who, in the case of Abraham, even was ready to sacrifice his only son for the faith, and so on it went. These things that were faced again and again and again. He gives you all these examples. Seeing we are compassed about with so great a cloud of witness, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. There's a couple of important things to think about here. One is, can we actually get rid of sin? Are we just helpless? Do we have to have somebody do it for us? There are two aspects of this. One is the guilt for sin. There's not a thing in the world you could do to get rid of that. That can only be done for you by Jesus Christ. The other, though, is the continuing sin, the continuing draw to sin, because sin has a way of taking on a life of its own in your life. You think you've got everything under control, but because of things you have done in the past, certain things start catching up with you again. What's going to deliver you from the temptation, from the sin, from the stuff that catches up with you that you didn't think you still had around? Okay, we understand this. Metaphorically, we were unleavened at the cross. Jesus' death took the guilt away from us. So, the eradication, metaphorically speaking, of sin began and is done before the days of unleavened bread even began. You can't get the leaven rid of it yourself. Jesus has to get rid of it for you. However, notice he says to us, it's not to say there is nothing you can do. He says, let us lay aside the sin that does so easily beset us. That involves a conscious decision on our part. Self-examination. And to consider, what am I still doing that I was doing a year ago that I need to stop? Well, lay it aside. It's easier said than done, but hey, not everything we have to do in life is easy. We begin our life with Christ with a clean slate. But there are things we do or don't do that may have something to do with how it stays that way. He goes on to say in verse 2, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. Now consider him that endured such contradiction of sinners against himself, lest you be wearied and faint in your minds. You have not yet resisted unto blood, striving against sin. Is this our duty? Yep. It is our duty to resist sin. Strive against sin. Don't let it get hold of us. Now sometimes it does anyway. But you're going to have help. What form is that help likely to take? You think maybe God will just strengthen your backbone. Okay. How does He do that? You think maybe God will just change the way I look at things. He'll take away my desire for this. Okay. How does He do that? Does He do it by flipping switches in your brain? I think not in that sense. There is something else that we have to deal with here. There is more to the maintenance of the unleavened state than that we might think. He goes on in verse 5. He's continuing the thought. You have forgotten the exhortation which speaks unto you as unto children. My son, despise not the chastening of the Lord. Don't faint when you are rebuked of Him. For whom the Lord loves, He chastens and scourges every son whom He receives. Okay. God's going to give me the backbone to do this. How's He going to do it? Same way my father gave me the backbone. With a belt. More than once. I mean, the belt was the weapon of choice in my household that I can remember. Doubled over, belt about that wide, doubled over into two so that it made two cracks when it hit you. One would hit you and the other one when the belt hit the belt. And it was a very effective way of impressing, of stiffening the backbone, of changing the brain hookup to tell you what's going to work for you and what's not going to work. Chastisement is crucial in changing behavior. I'm sorry, that's the way we were made. I know there are people who don't like the idea of chastising children. Chastising children has the imprimatur of the Bible all over it. It's perfectly, not cruelty, but you can chastise your children. Okay, this is the thing we have to understand. Don't despise the chastening of the Lord. Don't dismiss it. Don't toss it off. Whom the Lord loves, He chastens and scourges every son whom He receives. Now, I've often asked myself, occasionally been asked, how can I tell the difference if this adversity which has come upon me is the chastening of God or if it's just time and chance? My answer to it is, you're smart if you look upon all of them as the chastening of God. Every adversity that comes your way. As lessons to be learned, things to be driven home. What does God expect me to take away from this? You do that, and the chances are, as time goes on, your backbone will be stiffened. Chances are some of the switches in your brain will be turned on or off, and you will not do some of the things you used to do. I'd never really thought of it until today, to tell you the truth. Actually, maybe yesterday, that it was dawning on me, that the chastening process is a part of the real event taking place that is only pictured by de-leavening and getting the leaven out of our lives and keeping it out. That the way in which it is done is with the belt doubled up across the backside, just like your dad did. And it does work. God does it just like our dad did. The only thing about us is that we are left free to wonder sometimes whether or not God's doing this or whether I'm just unlucky. And like I said, He isn't necessarily going to tell you you're supposed to sit there and figure it out for yourself. And the chances are you need to learn from this. Learn from it. Because God could have kept it from happening to you, and He didn't. So, think about it and see what direction it will take with you. He goes on to say in verse 9, furthermore, we have had fathers of our flesh who corrected us, and we gave them reverence. Shall we not much rather be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? For verily for a few days, not much, He chastened us according to, for a few days, He chastened us according to what He's going to do for our profit, that we might be partakers of His holiness. The objective of God's chastisement is to change conduct. It's as simple as that. Holiness. Now, no chastening for the present seems joyous but grievous, but afterwards it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness into them who are exercised thereby. I never thought of it as exercise. I'd rather done push-ups. But, that's basically what's involved. It is an exercise to learn, get discipline, and get going. He goes on to say, so lift up the hands that hang down and the feeble knees. I'm going to tell you, translate that into modern English. Stop feeling sorry for yourself. Because that's the natural thing for us to do. We just get to, put out the lower lip, start feeling sorry. Woe is me. Why me, Lord? And if it were just, it would be so good for us once upon a time for us, the voice to come from the sky saying, why not you? You're not anything any more special than anybody else. If somebody else is going to suffer, why shouldn't you suffer? You've got some things to learn just like everybody's got to learn. So take it. Stand up and take it. Then he says, and of course, how much time do we waste feeling sorry for ourselves? And it is indeed wasting. Nothing good ever comes of it. Make straight paths for your feet, lest that which is lame be turned out of the way, but let it be healed. Now, this is another analogy he's drawing here. Most elderly people understand well enough that they have to watch their path. You have to pay attention to where you put your feet. You have to pay attention to the speed or the deliberate nature of while you're doing things. And you know well enough, sometimes from experience, and maybe you've got almost to the experience, that if you don't, you're going to be on the floor, maybe with a broken hip. So this is what he's saying, is pay attention to where you're walking, spiritually speaking, metaphorically speaking, which means giving attention to the decisions you're making, the way you're living your life, the way you're treating your neighbors, the way you're going about your business practices and so forth. Every aspect of it. Okay. It's all too easy to stumble and fall, so pay attention to what you're doing. My father used to tell me this so many times. Ronnie, pay attention to what you're doing. Because my mind was often somewhere over here and what I was doing was right here. And how many times did I screw something up because of that? And unfortunately, that lesson's still working on me. Follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord, looking diligently, lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness spring up, trouble you, and many be defiled. Oh, the number of times I have seen that happen. And because we are called together, because we become a church, because we become an assembly of believers, that sometimes people get their feelings hurt. And sometimes people become bitter. And the bitterness never accomplishes anything worthwhile. And oftentimes it causes many other people to have their own defilements as a result of it. There's no place for that among us, but it keeps creeping in. It may take God's chastisement to get it out. Lest there be any fornicator or profane person like Esau, who for one morsel of meat sold his birthright, or like the guy in Corinth who was sleeping with his father's wife. Sometimes drastic measures are called for. And, we went through a period of time after our separation back in 1978 from the Worldwide Church of God, which would disfellowship somebody at the drop of a hat. And really went way overboard in doing that type of thing. And so naturally a lot of us went overboard the other side. And we wouldn't do any kind of discipline for anything at all. Somewhere in all this, we're going to have to learn some lessons that if we're going to have a coherent, cohesive church out there, somewhere in the field, we are going to have to come to grips with what Paul writes, that there are obligations. And if you're not careful, you're going to wind up with a root of bitterness getting involved, and here we go. There was an interesting book, actually some time ago that I read on this that talked about how that oftentimes there are people who have a knack, they will do something wrong, and when discipline starts their direction, they can turn themselves into an underdog at the snap of their fingers and have people feeling sorry for them. Paul is warning the Corinthians on this. He says, don't let yourself feel sorry for this guy. The good thing to do, the right thing to do, if you feel sorry for him, the thing to do is to put him out of the church so to change. Discipline him. Don't eat with him. Don't pretend that he's all right when he's not. Churches, if they're ever going to succeed, are going to have a discipline. And you remember what Paul said? This discipline which was applied from many. Not by one, many. This is something that churches have got to be prepared to do with everyone involved. And it's one of the hardest things they will ever learn to do. And more often than not, they just feel sorry for it, or they will wince or draw back and won't do what has to be done. And as a result, many are defiled. I can't tell you how to do that. I really can't. All I can do is tell you it's got to be done. Now, This is congruent here with the letter to Corinth. Don't hang out with the wrong kind of people. For you know how that afterward, when Esau would have inherited the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place of repentance, though he sought it carefully with tears. And you have not come to the mountain that might be touched, that burned with fire, nor unto blackness and darkness and tempest, and the sound of a trumpet and the voice of words, which the people that heard it entreated that the word should not be spoken to them any more. Now, he's not talking an analogy here. He's talking history. This is precisely what happened at Sinai, when with all the manifestations of God coming down on the mountain and his voice rolling down the sides of the mountain, they all prayed, please don't let him talk to us anymore. We'll die if he does. So, they couldn't stand it. So terrible was the sight, Moses said, I exceedingly fear and quake. Now Paul goes on in verse 22 to another metaphor. You are come into Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to an innumerable company of angels. Well, maybe that's a metaphor, maybe it's not. We don't see the heavenly city. We don't see the innumerable company of angels, but that's where we have come. That's the jolly band of brothers that we have joined ourselves to in becoming Christians. We have come to the general assembly and church of the firstborn who are written in heaven, and to God the judge of all, and to the spirits of just men made perfect. When I sit and think about that, it almost makes the hair stand up on my neck to realize that we are a part of a body much larger than anything we can see. That many of the soldiers in this army are invisible to us. They're not here. Some of them are people who are asleep and waiting for the resurrection of the dead. But we come to them. This is the church of God, this general assembly of the church of God, general assembly. I think panegyric, it seems to me like is the word. And basically, this is everybody, living and dead, who has ever been in Christ. That we are part and parcel with them. We have come to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, to the blood of sprinkling that speaks better things than that of Abel. See that you don't refuse him that speaks. If they escape not, who refused him that spoke on earth, how much more do you think we're not going to escape if we turn away from him that speaks from heaven, whose voice then shook the earth? But now he has promised, saying, yet once more, I am going to shake not the earth only, I'm going to shake the heavens. One of the great arias from the Messiah comes from this particular idea. And this word, yet once more, signifies the removing of those things that are shaken, as of things that are made, that those things which cannot be shaken remain. So here we are. We've come to this body of people, and we carry the Spirit of God with us. And the time comes when everything in heaven and earth are going to be shaken, shaken, shaken until nothing, only what's left is what cannot be shaken. Where do you fit in that? Where do you fit? And if you think you could be shaken, how do we get from here to where you cannot? Because we can. It may take some pain. It has for an awful lot of people before you. But whatever you do, don't let bitterness get into this picture. You've got to realize, as I mentioned the fact that my parents used the belt. I was spanked by my dad, by my mother, by aunts, by uncles. Spanking was a part of my... I really tore up my uncle once. And he was getting the belt out, ready to let me and his son Richard have it. And I sort of teared up a little. I said, Uncle Oscar, I'm just not used to being treated this way. And that was his reaction. He liked to have collapsed on the floor because he knew all too well I was very used to being treated that way. But I tell you this to tell you this. Never in all the time of my growing up did I ever doubt that I was loved. I was chastised, but I always knew my family loved me. It was evident all over the place. And not least in the number of things they let me get away with. But still, God lets us get away with stuff too, doesn't he? So to understand that, we're going to be through an awful lot. Yes, we are going to be shaken. We're going to be shaken enough to find out whether we'll stand up or whether we'll give up. But it's never at any time an evidence that God does not love us. Rather the contrary. It is that he cares about us more than anything, that we are the reason why he's doing all the stuff that he's doing. Wherefore, we receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us have grace, whereby we may serve God with reverence and godly fear. For our God is a consuming fire.